So the Knicks are in the finals. Let's look at their two potential matchups. First up, Oklahoma City. The biggest reason the Knicks can beat Oklahoma City is because they've already shown they can completely control the style of a playoff series. That matters because the Thunder thrive when games become fast, chaotic, and loaded with turnover. New York's entire playoff run has been the opposite. They've slowed games down, crushed teams in the half court, and completely erased mistakes from their offense. That's why the Knicks have won 11 straight playoff games. That's why they swept Cleveland. That's why they also swept Philadelphia earlier in the postseason. And that's why they've outscored opponents by 262 total points across an 11-game stretch. That's reportedly the best point differential over an 11-game playoff run in league history. That's not dominance in one category. That's dominance everywhere. The Thunder forced teams into uncomfortable basketball. New York doesn't really get uncomfortable. That's the difference. The Knicks aren't relying on transition scoring every possession. They aren't depending on athletic advantages. They're relying on execution. Every possession gets dragged into half-court basketball, where mistakes become magnified. Oklahoma City wants speed. New York wants efficiency. Right now, efficiency's been winning games for the Knicks at a ridiculous level. One stat that jumps out immediately is the Knicks being 6-0 on the road during the playoff. That matters a ton against Oklahoma City because the Thunder crowd completely changes momentum during games. Most teams fall apart offensively there because Oklahoma City speeds everything up defensively. The Knicks haven't shown signs of that happening. Their turnover rate has stayed low throughout this entire run, and that's a nightmare matchup for a Thunder defense built around steals and transition opportunities. That's where Jalen Brunson becomes the center of the entire series. Oklahoma City has elite perimeter defenders everywhere. Alex Caruso is one of the best defensive guards alive. Shea's length creates problems. Jalen Williams can switch on to almost anybody, but Brunson's playoff numbers show he's still producing against every coverage thrown at him. Against Cleveland alone, he averaged 25.5 points and 7.8 assists. He also dropped 38 points in Game 1 of that series and controlled the pace in basically every fourth quarter. What makes Brunson so dangerous against Oklahoma City isn't just scoring, it's the turnover control. The Thunder destroy teams when they create live ball turnovers because suddenly one mistake becomes a transition dunk or a corner three within seconds. Brunson's entire style eliminates that chaos. The Knicks' offense becomes slower and more controlled when he's on the floor. The article literally points out how the turnover rate drops with him running the offense. That's massive because Oklahoma City's biggest strength statistically is forcing turnovers and converting them into fast break scoring. If New York keeps possessions clean, the Thunder lose one of their biggest statistical advantages immediately. Another thing that matters is the way Brunson manipulates double teams. Oklahoma City rotates faster than almost any team in basketball, but Brunson's become elite at forcing multiple defenders to collapse into the paint. That opens up spacing everywhere else. And against the Thunder team that loves aggressive perimeter pressure, that spacing becomes critical. Karl Anthony Towns might actually be the biggest swing factor in the entire matchup. Oklahoma City's defense becomes terrifying when Chet Holmgren can stay near the rim and erase mistakes. But Towns changes the geometry of the floor completely because he stretches defenses far beyond the three-point line. Cleveland already struggled with this. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen kept getting dragged away from the paint, which opened driving lanes nonstop for Brunson. The same thing could happen against Holmgren. Holmgren's elite as a rim protector. Everybody knows that. But if he's forced to constantly defend spacing 25 feet from the basket, Oklahoma City's help defense changes dramatically. That's one of the biggest reasons New York can win this matchup statistically. Towns isn't just standing around, waiting for shots either. The Knicks are using him differently than Minnesota ever did. He's becoming a screener, a short roll playmaker, an elbow facilitator, and a secondary post option instead of forcing endless isolations. That's made him more efficient and way more disciplined. He's fouling less. He's forcing fewer bad shots. He's making quicker decisions. Against a Thunder team that thrives on hesitation and turnovers, quick decisions become huge. And Towns has quietly become one of the Knicks' biggest rebounding advantages too. Oklahoma City's athletic, but New York's physicality on the glass can absolutely change this series. Josh Hart's rebounding alone creates extra possessions constantly. Hart recorded a playoff triple-double earlier in the postseason, and his offensive rebounding from the guard position changes entire games statistically. The Thunder love speed, but offensive rebounds kill transition opportunities. Every extra Knicks possession slows the game down further and keeps Oklahoma City from getting easy runouts. That's one of the sneaky biggest advantages New York has. Their rebounding directly attacks the Thunder style of basketball. The Thunder generate chaos through speed. The Knicks reduce possessions through rebounding and half-court offense. Completely opposite philosophies. Then there's OG. His role against Shea could decide everything defensively. Shea's been unbelievable throughout the playoff. 32 points and 9 assists. In Game 5 against San Antonio, multiple 30-point games this postseason, 42 points against Phoenix earlier in the playoffs. Elite efficiency despite absurd usage. Those are MVP level numbers, but OG's exactly the kind of defender built to at least make life harder statistically. What's important isn't shutting Shea down completely, because basically nobody does that. It's disrupting efficiency. OG's playoff impact has gone way beyond scoring because he's blown up actions before they even start, forced turnovers at the point of attack, and dominated transition defense. That transition part matters like crazy against Oklahoma City because the Thunder feast on fast break opportunities more than almost any team left. If OG and Bridges can force Oklahoma City into more half-court possessions, suddenly the Thunder offense looks a lot different statistically. The Knicks have already shown they can survive ugly physical playoff basketball. Oklahoma City prefers rhythm and speed. New York prefers contact and execution. But that reminds me, this video is presented by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy app. The playoff push is heating up right now, and with all these big games, I've been using PrizePicks a lot more. It just makes watching everything way more interesting, because now I'm not just watching the game, I actually have a take on how players are going to perform. I've always liked making player picks on PrizePicks, and now I can go even further. I can mix different player stat projections and build out my lineups however I want. So every single game actually matters way more. And what I like is everything is in one place. Whether it's playoff matchups or big tournament games, I can make all my picks right in the PrizePicks app. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, a preferred partner of the NBA. Mikal Bridges becomes another huge factor because of durability and versatility. The Thunder throw wave after wave of athletes at teams. Bridges is one of the few wing players in basketball who can survive gigantic loads without his production collapsing. Against Cleveland, he handled major defensive assignments, helped trap Donovan Mitchell, and still stayed productive offensively. That versatility matters because Oklahoma City constantly tests lineups with speed and depth. Bridges gives New York somebody who can stay on the floor nearly the entire game without becoming a liability offensively or defensively. That's huge in a finals matchup where fatigue starts deciding possessions. Another stat that matters is New York's average margin of victory during this playoff streak, being over 23 points per game. That number's absurd. Playoff basketball usually becomes tighter and lower scoring as rounds continue. The Knicks are doing the opposite. They're blowing teams out consistently. That tells you this isn't just clutch shot luck or late game variance. They're controlling games from start to finish, and they're doing it through balance. That's probably the scariest thing about the Knicks right now. There isn't one statistical category carrying everything. They're winning through rebounding, three-point shooting, defensive switching, transition scoring, half-court execution, and low turnovers all at the same time. Oklahoma City's amazing defensively, but New York doesn't have one weak point that can easily be attacked. Even the lineup chemistry stands out statistically. Brunson, Bridges, Hart, OG, and Towns all fit naturally because nearly every player can pass, rebound, defend, handle the ball, and shoot. That level of versatility destroys matchup hunting because there's almost nobody to hide against. That's critical against the Thunder because Oklahoma City's defense usually survives by finding weak offensive players to help off. New York doesn't really give them that luxury consistently. The other thing working in New York's favor is playoff experience in slower game. Oklahoma City's athleticism overwhelms teams early in games, but playoff basketball eventually turns into execution under pressure. The Knicks have repeatedly dominated clutch possessions because Brunson controls tempo so well. Meanwhile, Oklahoma City sometimes relies heavily on transition momentum and defensive pressure to create separation. If New York avoids turnovers and keeps games in the half court, the pressure shifts toward Oklahoma City, needing difficult shot creation more often. And while Shea's obviously capable of that, the Knicks have multiple perimeter defenders they can rotate onto him. OG Bridges, Hart, even different physical looks. Possession to possession can matter over a long series. The Knicks don't need to stop Shea entirely. They just need to make his efficiency dip slightly while keeping everybody else from getting transition rhythm. That's where Hart becomes really important statistically. His rebounding completely changes game flow. Guards usually don't dominate possessions on the glass like he does. Every rebound he grabs immediately prevents Oklahoma City from running. And when Hart pushes pace selectively after rebounds, New York controls when transition happens instead of letting the Thunder dictate tempo. That control matters more than anything in this matchup. The Thunder are statistically elite in transition scoring, steals, fast break efficiency, paint defense, and forced turnovers. The Knicks counter almost every one of those strengths naturally. Low turnovers reduce transition chances. Strong rebounding limits fast breaks. Half-court execution slows pace. Spacing pulls rim protectors away from the basket. Physical wings reduce driving angles. That's why this matchup feels way closer statistically than people might expect, looking at Oklahoma City's athleticism. And honestly, New York's physicality could become exhausting over a 7-game series. The Thunder rotate faster than almost anybody, but constant rebounding battles and slower half-court possessions wear teams down differently than speed does. Cleveland looked completely overwhelmed physically by the end of that series. Philadelphia couldn't keep up either. Another huge factor is that New York's defense has quietly become elite without needing constant gamble. Oklahoma City creates chaos defensively by pressuring ball handlers and jumping passing lanes constantly. The Knicks are more controlled. They switch effectively, rebound everything, and force teams into difficult half-court possession. That's why they've dominated both ends statistically during this 11-game streak. And the numbers surrounding Towns defensively are especially important because that used to be the biggest criticism against him in playoff basketball. Now he's playing some of the best defense of his career while also rebounding at a massive level. If Towns can hold up defensively against Oklahoma City's spacing and still punish them offensively, the entire matchup changes because offensively, Oklahoma City's biggest advantage is usually forcing centers into uncomfortable situations. Towns changes that equation since he can shoot from deep, facilitate offense, and rebound without needing constant post isolation. Then there's the clutch factor. Brunson's become one of the best late-game scorers in basketball throughout this run. His mid-range game has completely controlled fourth quarters repeatedly. And while Shea's also elite late in games, the Knicks have shown stronger overall team execution in clutch situations recently because everybody around Brunson understands their role perfectly. That chemistry matters in finals basketball more than people think. The Knicks aren't surviving on random hot shooting streaks. Their entire roster construction makes sense statistically. Every starter complements every other starter. Hart rebounds. Bridges defends everywhere. OG destroys passing lanes. Towns spaces the floor. Brunson controls pace. There's almost no overlap in weaknesses. Against Oklahoma City, that balance could become the deciding factor. Because while the Thunder have unbelievable athleticism and defense, New York's strengths directly challenge the things Oklahoma City does best. And the stats throughout the playoffs back that up completely. 11 straight wins, 6-0 on the road, plus 262-point differential across 11 games. Over 23 points per game, average margin of victory. Those aren't fluke numbers. Those are championship-level numbers. And if the Thunder advance, they'd probably be facing the one team left capable of dragging them away from chaos and into a slower, more physical half-court series where every possession actually matters, which is kind of terrifying for Oklahoma City, considering the Knicks have spent this entire playoff run turning elite teams into exhausted brick factories. Basketball's cruel like that. 1 minute, a team's flying around, forcing turnovers. The next minute, Josh Hart's grabbing another rebound like a raccoon, fighting over French fries in a parking lot at midnight. But then the Knicks' other matchup could be the Spurs. The Knicks can absolutely beat San Antonio because this matchup would force the Spurs into the exact type of basketball they still struggle with statistically. That's half-court execution against an elite physical defense. The Spurs are terrifying in transition. Their length destroys spacing. Wemby covers half the planet defensively because apparently basketball scouts built a player in a laboratory after accidentally feeding a skyscraper radioactive protein powder. But New York's entire playoff run has been built around slowing games down and turning every possession into a grind. That matters because the Knicks have already proven they can dominate elite teams in slower games. 11 straight playoff wins. A 4-game sweep over Cleveland, another sweep earlier against Philadelphia, a plus 262-point differential across 11 playoff games, an average margin of victory of 23.8 points per game, 6-0 on the road. Those numbers don't happen accidentally. Those numbers happen when a team completely controls pace, rebounding, and efficiency possession after possession. San Antonio's biggest weakness, statistically, is half-court offensive consistency. That's the exact thing New York forces teams into. The Spurs want transition opportunities, paint attacks, athleticism, and chaos. The Knicks want every possession dragged into physical playoff basketball, where every mistake gets punished. And honestly, that's where New York starts gaining a major edge in this matchup. Jalen Brunson becomes the center of everything immediately. San Antonio has length everywhere. Stephon Castle is physical. De'Aaron Fox is explosive. Dylan Harper gives them another big guard. Wemby erases mistakes behind everybody, but Brunson's playoff numbers show he's still dominating, regardless of size and athleticism. Against Cleveland, he averaged 25.5 points and 7.8 assists. He won Eastern Conference Finals Most Valuable Player unanimously. He had 38 points in Game 1 alone. Throughout the postseason, he's repeatedly controlled fourth quarters and completely manipulated defenses. That's the thing with Brunson. Defenders can stay attached perfectly for most of a possession, and suddenly, he creates separation anyway because of footwork and pace control. San Antonio's length helps against a lot of guards, but Brunson's game isn't built around blowing by defenders with speed. It's built around balance, angles, and forcing defenders into awkward spots, possession after possession. And the Spurs still struggle statistically against elite pull-up guards. That's massive because Brunson's mid-range game has become one of the deadliest weapons in the playoffs. If San Antonio switches bigger defenders onto him, he manipulates pace and attacks slower feet. If they trap him aggressively, Karl Anthony Towns becomes dangerous immediately because of spacing. That Towns and Wemby matchup might honestly become the defining statistical battle of the finals, because normally, Wemby completely changes games defensively by staying near the rim. Opponents drive into the paint, and suddenly their shot disappears into another dimension. The guy covers impossible amounts of space defensively. He alters everything. Oklahoma City already struggled with that throughout the Western Conference Finals, but Towns creates problems that most centers simply can't. Towns stretches defenses ridiculously far from the basket. Against Cleveland, he forced Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen away from the rim constantly. That opened driving lanes for Brunson throughout the series. Against San Antonio, the exact same thing could happen with Wemby. If Wemby stays near the paint, Towns gets open perimeter shots. If Wemby follows Towns outside, the Spurs lose their elite rim protection. That's why this matchup becomes so fascinating statistically. Towns completely changes defensive geometry, and this version of Towns is way more disciplined than earlier playoff runs in his career. He's fouling less. He's making quicker decisions. He's taking smarter shots. Instead of forcing endless isolations, the Knicks use him as a screener, a trail shooter, an elbow facilitator, and a short roll playmaker. That makes him far more efficient against aggressive defenses. Against Cleveland, Towns dominated defensive rebounding possessions too. That becomes huge against San Antonio because the Spurs love transition offense. Every rebound New York secures prevents the Spurs from getting downhill speed opportunities. That's another major reason the Knicks can win this series. Their rebounding directly attacks San Antonio's preferred style of play. Josh Hart becomes enormous in this matchup for exactly that reason. Hart rebounds like a power forward despite playing guard. He already recorded a playoff triple-double earlier this postseason, and his rebounding changes entire games statistically because New York keeps generating extra possessions without needing traditional huge lineups. Against a younger Spurs roster, Hart's physicality could become exhausting over a long series. Loose balls, offensive rebounds, extra possessions, hustle plays, those things completely swing playoff momentum, and the Spurs, despite all their talent, are still one of the youngest teams left. That experience gap matters historically in finals basketball. New York's core has already played major playoff roles. Brunson controls tempo like a veteran star. Bridges never looks rattled. Hart thrives in physical, ugly games. OGs become one of the most versatile playoff defenders in basketball. Towns is finally playing disciplined postseason basketball consistently. San Antonio's talent is ridiculous, but younger teams historically struggle when finals possessions slow down late in games. The Knicks specialize in those situations. And defensively, New York matches up surprisingly well against San Antonio's perimeter creation. OG's impact becomes gigantic here. Throughout the playoffs, he's guarded primary creators every night, blown up passing lanes, created turnovers, and defended basically every position imaginable. Against Cleveland, he constantly pressured Donovan Mitchell and helped hold the Cavaliers under 100 points in Game 4. Against San Antonio, OG could rotate across Fox, Castle, and wings in transition. That versatility matters because the Spurs love cross-matching and attacking quickly before defenses get set. But the Knicks have multiple defenders capable of surviving those switches. Mikal Bridges gives them another elite wing defender who can handle massive minutes without offensive drop-off. Bridges has quietly become one of the Knicks' most valuable playoff pieces because he fills every gap statistically. Secondary creation, transition finishing, spot-up shooting, defensive assignment, heavy minutes. The Knicks trust him to stay on the floor nearly nonstop. And against a Spurs team loaded with athletic wing, that durability matters constantly. And honestly, New York's defensive physicality could become one of the defining themes of the series. The Spurs are longer and faster. The Knicks are stronger and more experienced. Completely different styles. San Antonio's transition attack looks terrifying when games become open. Fox especially changes everything with speed and downhill pressure. Against Oklahoma City, he repeatedly created paint touches and forced defensive rotations. But New York's perimeter defenders are exactly the type built to slow that down. Bridges, Hart, OG. They can rotate bodies onto Fox constantly and force him into tougher half-court possessions. That's critical because the Spurs sometimes struggle generating efficient offense late in games outside of Fox and Wemby. The Knicks love forcing teams into those situations. And another thing that stands out statistically is New York's turnover control. The Spurs thrive when games become chaotic because their length creates steals, contests, and transition chances everywhere. But the Knicks have consistently played low turnover basketball throughout this playoff run. Brunson controls pace. Hart secures possessions. Bridges rarely forces mistakes. Towns has become more disciplined. If San Antonio can't create transition opportunities through turnovers, they're forced into more half-court offense. That's exactly where New York gains control statistically. Wemby obviously changes everything, though. That's the terrifying part for the Knicks. He's already one of the most impactful playoff defenders alive. He anchors elite rim protection while also switching onto guards. That combination barely even makes sense from a basketball standpoint. It sounds like somebody created a video game character after losing an argument with physics. Against Oklahoma City, Wemby had dominant defensive stretches constantly. He also recorded a massive 33-point, 8-rebound, 5-assist playoff performance. Offensively, he can score from deep, attack off the dribble, finish over defenders, and handle transition possessions himself. But New York's physicality might actually be one of the better counters available. The Knicks rebound relentlessly. They crash the offensive glass constantly. Hart attacks possessions like somebody told him the basketball contains confidential government document. Towns battles physically inside. OG's strength matters defensively. Over a 7-game series, constant physical play could wear down even somebody as ridiculous as Wemby. And importantly, New York's spacing could force Wemby into uncomfortable defensive decisions repeatedly. That's where Brunson and Towns together become so dangerous. Brunson manipulates help defenders constantly, while Towns drags rim protection away from the basket. If Wemby helps aggressively inside, Towns gets perimeter opportunities. If Wemby stays attached outside, Brunson gets cleaner driving lanes. That balance has already destroyed elite defenses throughout the playoffs. Another stat that matters heavily is New York's average margin of victory during this 11-game streak being nearly 24 points per game. That's absurd in playoff basketball. Most postseason series become close because elite teams adjust quickly. The Knicks aren't barely surviving games. They're steamrolling opponents. That speaks directly to lineup chemistry and versatility. Brunson, Hart, Bridges, OG, and Towns all fit naturally together because every player can defend multiple positions, pass, rebound, switch, and handle the ball. Against San Antonio's length and switching ability, that versatility becomes critical because there's almost nobody to target as a weak link. And unlike some teams, the Knicks don't depend on one specific style offensively. They can win through isolation scoring, offensive rebounds, three-point shooting, transition defense, half-court execution, defensive switching. That flexibility becomes incredibly important in a final series where adjustments happen every game. Meanwhile, San Antonio still relies heavily on athletic advantages and defensive disruption. The Spurs are terrifying long-term because their roster construction mirrors modern championship basketball perfectly. Big guards, length everywhere, rim protection, transition pressure, defensive versatility. Castle and Harper especially give them multiple perimeter players who can switch defensively while still attacking downhill offensively. But playoff basketball eventually becomes about execution under pressure. The Knicks already look completely comfortable in those moments statistically. Brunson's clutch scoring has controlled fourth quarters throughout this run. The Knicks consistently dominate late possessions because they slow games down and avoid mistakes. That veteran execution matters enormously against younger teams. And another underrated factor is road performance. The Knicks being 6-0 on the road during the playoffs shows they can maintain their style regardless of environment. That's huge because San Antonio's energy and speed become even more dangerous at home. But New York hasn't shown signs of panic anywhere during this postseason. Everything about this playoff run has looked controlled. Even defensively, New York's transition defense deserves more attention in this matchup. The Spurs want fast pace and downhill attacks. The Knicks have consistently dominated transition defense while also rebounding at an elite level. That combination directly attacks San Antonio's biggest offensive strengths. And if the Spurs are forced into slower games repeatedly, New York's advantages become clearer and clearer. Because while Wemby's unbelievable defensively, San Antonio still doesn't have the same proven half-court offensive consistency as the Knicks. Brunson can create efficient offense late in games nearly every possession. The Spurs still rely more heavily on athletic pressure and transition opportunities. That's dangerous in regular season basketball. Finals, basketball usually becomes slower and more physical, which is basically the exact environment New York's been dominating throughout the playoff. And honestly, the psychological pressure would become fascinating too. The Knicks are chasing their first championship since 1973. Their first finals appearance since 1999 already changed everything around the franchise. Madison Square Garden, during the finals, would look completely unhinged. Half the arena would probably pass out before tip-off. Somewhere in Manhattan, a traffic cone would get interviewed on local television as a good luck charm because sports fans become absolute goblins during championship runs. But statistically, New York would enter the series with legitimate reasons to believe they could control it. Their rebounding directly challenges San Antonio's transition attack. Their spacing forces difficult decisions on Wemby. Their perimeter defense matches up well against Fox and the Spurs guards. Their low turnover offense reduces transition chances. Their playoff experience matters late in games. Their lineup versatility eliminates weak points. And the biggest thing of all might simply be pace. The Knicks want slower games. San Antonio wants speed. Throughout this entire postseason, New York's controlled pace against basically everybody. Cleveland couldn't speed them up. Philadelphia couldn't disrupt their half-court offense. Opponents keep trying to force chaos. And the Knicks just keep dragging games into physical execution battles, possession after possession. That's why the statistics surrounding this run are so ridiculous. 11 straight wins, plus 262-point differential, nearly 24-point average margin of victory, dominant road performances, elite rebounding, low turnovers, defensive versatility. Those numbers describe a team completely in control of its identity. And if San Antonio advances, they'd be facing a Knicks roster specifically built to punish young athletic teams that rely heavily on transition rhythm and defensive chaos, which is kind of cruel, honestly. The Spurs spent years building an army of giant wings and impossible length just to potentially run into Josh Hart flying into passing lanes like somebody launched a bowling ball through a hardware store. Basketball's deeply strange sometimes.